Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who's ready to order a new pair of sneakers, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan, and you are listening to Sports Geek. This is episode 326 of Sports Geek, and in this week's episode, I catch up with Loretta Johns from the Sydney Swans, where she is the Executive General Manager of Media, Marketing and Communications. I might need to put the AI analysis over the job titles of guests. It could come in as one of the longest job titles, but Loretta does wear many hats. We do discuss her various roles at the Swans and her career at the Swans. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that. You can listen to this podcast on all good podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, my favourite Pocket Casts. Or you can listen to it and read all the show notes at sportsgeekhq.com. Go there. There'll be some links to Loretta and all the other episodes. As always, you can send me an email if there's a way that I can help you with our consulting around the digital and sponsorship and how to commercialize your fans and how to reach your fans with different platforms. Please send me an email, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com, or send me a message or DMs on the socials at Sean Callanan or at Sports Geek on most platforms. Well, that's enough. That's the intro. Let's get stuck into it. Here is my chat with Loretta Johns from the Sydney Swans.
Very happy to welcome Loretta Johns. She's the Executive General Manager of Media, Marketing and Communications at the Sydney Swans in the AFL. Loretta, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Longest title in the world.
Well, yeah, we probably should get some deep machine learning analysis on length of title and interestingness and viewership and listenership of guests. I haven't done that yet, but I have seen longer titles. But really good to have you on the podcast. Like I do with most people, I wanted to ask, how did you get your start in the world of sports business?
Well, my background is journalism. So I worked in television and radio in a variety of roles, from reading the news, weather presenting, talkback host. Wound up at 3AW, which is a radio station in Melbourne, as a general reporter. And one day I found myself doing a live cross into Neil Mitchell's program, who's their mornings host, doing a live cross next to a dead body. And I questioned what on earth I was doing with myself. But I did enjoy covering sport, because sport was about covering achievement, covering fun stuff, not covering the bad stuff. And an opportunity came up at 3AW to focus on sport. Yep. So I took that, covered sport there for a number of years, moved on to Sky News and did the same thing. And then an opportunity came up at the Carlton Football Club to manage media. So I went to Carlton and managed media there for a few years, and then followed my other half to Sydney.
So I just wanted to sort of like the jump from the journalists, breaking the stories, seeking out the stories, to, that media manager roles. Because footy at that time was, hey, how do we manage the media? How do we set up interviews? And we're starting to get into how do we create our own content. So you were sort of in that space when you moved to Carlton to organise presses and those kind of things, but then also that space where, who do we let this interview go to? Do we let this interview go to a 3AW, which is a high-rating radio show, or Channel 7, that's the broadcaster, or should we be keeping that to our fans? So were you in that early part, going from a journo to what we call clubland here in Australia, sort of managing that fine line of, do we go big media or we grow our own media platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Carlton they'd had a media manager in place for a number of years. Ian Coots had been there for quite a long time. But they'd not long before I started appointed a digital content team. And so Carlton was already creating their own content. It's fair to say when I started there, that probably pivoted a bit more into video, which was a new thing that clubs were doing at that time. And then, the media, managing the media and working out, should we give something to members? Should we push it into the newspaper? Should we give it to TV? I have to say at Carlton, there was, being in Melbourne and in that bubble of AFL, we probably said no to media a lot more than we said yes. And clubs were quite a closed environment in that respect. That was, a decade ago that I started at Carlton, and times have really changed since then. There's a lot more sporting media, focusing on footy now, but also what the access that they want is different. Everybody wants an exclusive. There's social media, which, was only in its infancy back then. And so I think that the level of access and that behind-the-scenes content that we see now has really evolved and taken off in certainly the last 5 years. A very different environment to when I first started at the Carlton Footy Club. And
so then you left Carlton and went up north and went to Sydney and went to the Swans, and coming from Melbourne, which is, AFL dominated, it takes all the back pages, takes all the radio airways, starts the news, moving into Sydney with a strong AFL club like the Swans have been there for many years, but it's very much a rugby town, a rugby league town, and it takes that focus. Was it a bit of a shock to the system, going up to Sydney and sort of reprogram your media brain to go, how do we tackle this market?
It really was, because, in Melbourne, where AFL is king, it's the water cooler talk, it's the number one sport in town. And so you've got, at every press conference or every media opportunity, a bunch of journalists coming to you. In Sydney, and it certainly hasn't changed too much since I've been up here, we're knocking on the doors of journalists. It's the other way around, because it's a rugby league town, even though the Swans have been so successful in their time up here. So that was really different. The number of media covering just the sport up here was really different. And so it was really reframing my thinking in that sense. And then also what makes news up here. Hamstrings and injuries are big news in Melbourne, not so up here. I think there's a real a need to connect players with the audience in a different sense. It's about the human interest stories, what they might be doing away from footy. Those stories are so important up here, more so than your traditional what happened on the weekend, who's injured, and so forth. So there's a difference in the two cities in that respect as well.
What I did want to do was sort of look at the last couple of years. The world of sports had a lot of change, had a lot of adversity to deal with, especially here in Australia, but the same everywhere else. Last year sort of felt like we were, coming out of things, and the Swans had a terrific year, some really big moments in the year last year. I wanted to talk about, and hopefully I think, a lot of my listeners, especially the ones around the world, would have seen, the event that was Buddy 1000, which is, Lance Franklin kicking his 1000th goal. It's a rare event. There's only been less than a handful of players that have done that. I want to discuss with you from a whole team point of view, from a, media marketing and comms point of view, what were some of the planning and logistics around that? Because like for a couple of weeks before, it was like, when is he going to kick the goal? He's getting closer. And then he eventually did it. Do you want to sort of pull back the curtain and sort of like, what was some of the planning and logistics around when's this moment going to happen? How are we going to capture it? What are the different things that, you probably, it wasn't just that 1 week, because it was the couple, he could have kicked a bag of goals a couple of weeks earlier and secured it. So what were some of the planning and logistics around that event, just from a pre-game and before it happened type of thing?
Yeah, and it was huge. And so the planning had actually started the year prior, because he could have kicked the 1,000 the year prior. So the planning had started in that year. I was actually on maternity leave with my second daughter. So I wasn't part of that very first initial stages where, my team had certainly pulled together a bunch of content that would play on the big screen and so forth when the moment happened. So we had all of that organised. But then in the early part of last year, we knew that this milestone was coming. So I was back on deck. It's fair to say there was a lot of planning, not only around the content, like what we might do in a media sense, in a content sense on our social media channels, in stadium and so forth. There was a security plan as well. And so I was part of those conversations too. What would happen if fans ran onto the field, which we expected probably would happen because we'd seen it here at the SCG with Plugger. And what would happen to our players? How would we get them off the field? How would we clear the field? How would we resume the game? And then it depended a lot as well on when this moment occurred, because should it occur in the last, minute of a match, would we bother resuming the game? Or if it happened in the last minute of a quarter, would we bother continuing that quarter? So that there was, and then what happened if it was a score review and heaven forbid we had to reset and it wasn't actually a score? So all of those things were factored into the planning. It's fair to say that we didn't plan for having two of our players out on Driver Avenue during the match. There was a few things that occurred that we didn't anticipate, because I think if you've seen the footage when Lance kicked it, the ball had barely connected with his foot and fans were running onto the field. And so it was chaos, but it was great chaos. I was standing at the top of our players' race, telling security to let players through because I could see them trying to make their way back through the crowd. Lance basically crowd surfed back to the players' race. But my priority at that point was, one, get our players off the field and into the rooms. But secondly, for our host broadcaster, Channel 7, to make sure that they had first access to Lance and could talk about the moment. So we were able to tee that up as soon as we got Lance into the rooms. He chatted to Matthew Richardson. But from there, it was all the other stories. So there was, a tremendous amount of fan content that we used from social media. But there was a story of, two of our players, Chad Warner and Ollie Florent, who ended up out on Driver Avenue because they had to exit the stadium to get back into our rooms. And, even the next day there was this security guard that had got Lance out of the crowd. Everyone was, who's white shirt man? And then it was the story of the ball, and we wanted to get the ball back because that had been lost in the crowd. So there was a heap of different content and stories that unfolded over the next 24 hours after that. And then, of course, we were able to pull it all together on the Monday and bring the fan into the club that had caught the ball, reunite Lance with the ball, and Lance spoke to what was an absolute pack of media, probably the most media I've ever seen at a press conference here in Sydney. So a tremendous moment in not only our sporting club's history, but in world sport.
Yeah, amazing scenes. Again, the planning for knowing, one, you are not allowed to invade a ground on a normal occasion, but the weight of everyone knew it was going to happen. And then, I'll share some of the visions, and I'm sure your international counterparts will get the shakes when they see that many fans run onto the stadium, and the shot from the blimp of just watching them all come towards, and then all the little sub stories, the people that decided to run on and sit in the middle and have a picnic while it was happening, and to people having kicks of the footy, like all of that stuff that, it was a long delay. And then, like you said, again, the operation, imagine the operation staff when you find out two of your players are walking around outside the stadium trying to get back in because it was the only way they'd get back. It was a terrific event, and again, like everyone was watching and waiting for it, and the celebration around it was terrific. And then, most of those people were running out with their phones on record. And so, like, I was watching it at home, and part of me was watching it on 7, and then on social, and then you would open up Instagram or TikTok, and you would just be seeing all these different points of view. And then, the sigh of relief of, oh, everyone was okay. Like, Buddy was in the middle of that, and it was all just adoration and white shirt guy got him out, but it was like everyone's still like, just get him out. Okay, it's all great. Everyone's had their moment. Can he get off the field now? And everyone breathed. So an amazing experience, and I can only imagine what it was like being there, but then also trying to coordinate. Did someone get that shot? How was it? Did you have people positioned in different parts of the ground to sort of capture it? Have that, have that moment ready?
So we split up our content, so our social media team and media team. So I had myself and our communications manager positioned at different points of the ground because we didn't know which end Lance would kick it at and where he might exit for the ground from. So there were all of those factors at play. So we did have people stationed in various points. And then even insofar as just that shot of the time lapse of everyone running onto the ground, there were different cameras that were able to capture that. So I think that probably the thing that struck me the most about it, though, as you mentioned, that the social media element, I don't think I've ever seen another event where there was so much of the one moment, so much user-generated content. And we were seeing it for, the whole weekend. It just kept coming. The different angles, the different stories, fans just wanting to say that they were there and they were part of it. So that was really pleasing to see, and it was something that we were able to utilise and repurpose on our own channels in the week that followed.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that because one of the things we didn't touch on, your role at the Swans has grown. Like we said, we joked earlier that you've got a very long title, but marketing is something that was like added to your remit a couple of a couple of years ago, coming from the media comms piece. What was it like, sort of picking up that as a portfolio, and what did it entail? Because like when I talk about marketing at footy clubs, it's different. It's different for different teams. But what does that remit mean to you, and what are some of the things you've learnt picking up that portfolio?
Yeah, and look, it was completely, I guess, foreign to me because I didn't have a marketing background. I studied journalism, always worked in media, but I have to say it's definitely one of my passion points. How we promote what we do and everything that goes with that. So that was added to my portfolio in 2019, and I've fortunate had a wonderful team underneath me that I've learned a lot from over the journey, as I have from other people at the club that have had a marketing background. Probably what we do more at the Swans and say your footy clubs in Melbourne is we need to promote the game, just the general when the match is happening, building the profiles of our players. That there's a huge paid push behind that as well, and so we work really closely with OMD, who's our media agency, on a channel plan that's television commercials, out of home, digital advertising, then working with content partners, the likes of Concrete Playground, so that there is a real channel mix to it. And then we evaluate throughout the year, what's working, what's not, and try and tweak things along the way. I have to say that focus has really, in the last couple of years, led to a lot of data-driven marketing, looking at the insights and then using that as the basis for what we do. So that was all completely new to me coming into this role. But probably the content marketing part of it is what I'm really passionate about now, and how we can connect with fans that way, but teach them, give them the messages that we want to promote along the journey. So, something I'm still learning, but I guess I was fortunate as well. Before I had that as part of my portfolio, I'm actually very, very slowly chipping away at my MBA. And so I had studied a little bit of marketing through that prior to picking it up. So I had, I guess, some fundamental basics, but learning a lot as I go still.
Yeah, but I do think, your background in reporting and storytelling and telling a narrative is a really big part of what marketing is, and even more so now, like you said, content marketing. How can you take these stories, repurpose these stories for your marketing objectives, and sort of looking back at that data. And like we said, Sydney is a very different market to Melbourne. I think the Swans have done a terrific job in marketing the message of membership, which is ingrained in Melbourne. But you're also working with your team from a membership point of view to go, what should the product mix look like in Sydney, and how does it fit for the Sydney market? So you've been working with your team and the team that manages membership and developing that product, and then you're looking to market it, and you've sort of looked at that product mix going forward to sort of better fit for the Sydney market. Can you talk to that a little bit about like what those new products are, and how it has been driven by both the data, but then also what the Sydney market wants?
Yeah, so I've worked really closely with Natalie Fagg, who's our Executive General Manager of Consumer, and Nat's team really does set that product mix. And what we have seen over the last few years, especially coming out of COVID, is that committing to an 11-game membership might be a bit more of a stretch for some people because there's been so much uncertainty. Certainly now it does feel like we're back. We're back in events. We're back in the community. Footy's back. We had it last year where we had crowds at every game, but that was the first time we delivered a full season in a few years that hadn't been interrupted by COVID. And certainly we started last year, we were still coming out of COVID. There were still restrictions at the start of last year. So it does feel like footy's back, but what we have done is tweak that product mix where we have more flexible membership products. So we now offer a 5-game membership as opposed to just a traditional 11-game membership, which caters for people that know that they want to come to Swans games, they love the club, but they might not be able to commit to coming to every home game. There's another product that was developed last year, the Swans Pass, which is 11 tickets, but you could use those 11 tickets at one game, so you and 10 friends could come along, or you could use them one per home game across the year like a traditional 11-game membership. So it just provides some flexibility in what people might want to do. And also noting that people, come to the footy with friends. It's a social event. So recognizing some of that and tweaking the product mix accordingly. Probably the other thing on membership, really in the promotional field in my remit, we've just looked at we'll cut a new television commercial for this year. One of the things I'm really conscious of doing is reframing that perception of what it means to be a member. I think there has been a perception that to be a member of a footy club, you have to be head to toe in club colours. But the reality is our members don't necessarily sleep in red and white. They have jobs, they have interests outside of footy as well. So we've just cut a new TVC with Red Engine, Channel 7's agency we've been working with, to show Sydney Swans members, which, are women doing yoga at the beach, families in the park kicking a footy, people in the pub after work having a beer on their way to the footy, that people that look like you and I that might just have a scarf on, but they're proud to show the club colours still. So that's one of the challenges that we're working through is how we reframe membership so that people can really see themselves as members. And so our new television commercial, which is on air at the moment, is the start of that journey.
And it just helps you widen the net, puts it both as an experience and an entertainment option for people to come to a Swans game. And, I love that pass idea because, you'll have that advocate that does sleep in their red and white and they do want it, but they do want to bring their friends. And so that type of product can allow them to be the Pied Piper, come along to a game, and then allows you to start, expanding that experience. And then, and then it's your job from a marketing point of view is to really amplify that experience and let more people know about it. You get the great moments of Buddy 1000 and everyone knew about it, but what is it like at a regular Swans game, or what is it like at a high profile game? And, so my next question, is really tough for me as a Collingwood supporter, but you had a terrific grand final, you had a final series run, and you had that terrific preliminary final at SCG against my Pies. But the atmosphere there was amazing. And you were talking before about the UGC and just the experience. I wanted to ask you, how you've used that experience, which was amazing for, and goes into Swans law in the campaign this year to sort of say, hey, you've got to come to the game. You've got to be, this is what it's like.
And that's absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head of what we're trying to do is to showcase the game day experience and why you would come to the footy, because footy, we know, is so much better live. But that experience, particularly at the Collingwood games, we played the Pies twice at the SCG towards the end of last season. Both were sellout crowds in excess of 40,000 people. The atmosphere at both games was incredible, but particularly that prelim. It was electric. It was nail-biting. Wasn't great for my heart towards the end of the game, I have to say. But we, from that match, had the moment that the siren went, the user-generated content that we were able to pull from, people that were there on the day, it's incredible to watch. And we've pulled it all together. We created a piece of content that we used at the end of last year, but we've brought it back this year as a reason to, why you should go to the footy. And I don't think there's any television commercial creative that we could create ourselves that would speak to the experience of match day quite like that. Your fan content is actually probably your ultimate review of your product. So we've pulled that together and we're using that this year, certainly leading into our first home game against the Hawks on the 26th to show that why you should come along to a game at the SCG, because it is incredible. There's nothing quite like it. It's that emotion that, our fans, there were fans in tears, there were fans jumping up and down and screaming. It was the noise as people left the stadium. I can only hope that we'll see more of that this year because it was incredible.
Yeah, it was. And like I said, it was disappointing, but yeah, an amazing atmosphere.
Yeah, sorry, Sean.
If I go to another final like that this year, I'll still be happy. And I think it's also another thing that, especially in that membership mentality, you fight so hard to get someone to be a member. But then I think that your marketing doesn't stop there. You've still got to keep marketing to your members to turn up, because sometimes people go, okay, here's my money, thank you, I've done my good thing, I've supported the club. But if they don't go to the game, you're not getting the benefit of the crowd behind the team and the atmosphere and making the atmosphere for everyone else. So it's also like that bit of content not only draws in new fans, but the fans who are like, oh yeah, I have to be at that game, I have to come, and it does fire them up. So it's as much marketing to the people you've already got, your existing customers, which I think is so important to say, hey, you've still got to come to the game. We do appreciate the financial commitment you've made and all of those kind of things, but one of the things the crowd does bring, the members do bring, is that atmosphere, and they make the game experience. So you've got to do that marketing effort to get them there as well.
Absolutely, and I think my team is really focused on, well, firstly, audience growth, and our audience is huge. We've got, according to YouGov data that was out in January, 2 million fans now. So it's the most of any sporting team in the country. But from those 2 million fans, it's really getting fans to come along to the game, and then getting those who are coming along to the game to become members. And as you say, also reminding our members to come along to the game. So, that's what my whole team is really focused on week to week, whether they're focusing on that through media or through social media on our own channels or through our website, or through our comms to members through EDM. It really is a concerted effort across all of those metrics to drive audience growth, which ultimately leads to more members and more attendees at our home games.
Terrific. One thing I did want to ask you was International Women's Day a few weeks ago, as we're recording this. I wanted to ask you, you've been in the industry a long time from a media point of view, then working in Clubland and now been at the Swans. How have you found that it's changed, and what's some of the work that you've done at the Swans to sort of help that change happen?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. So I started covering footy back in 2005 as a journo. And back then there were a few female sports reporters, the likes of Tiffany Cherry, Angela Pippos, Kelly Underwood, but there weren't many of us, and certainly not many of us on the day-to-day beat going to footy clubs and press conferences. And back in the day, without naming names, there were certain coaches and then probably a couple of players who just didn't want to know about answering a question from a woman. You'd be shut down or made fun of, but they'd answer a question from a male journalist, even if it was the same question, which was immensely frustrating. Thankfully, not everyone was like that, and there were certainly advocates and some wonderful men that I worked with in the industry back then too. Fast forward to my time at Carlton, and there's a lot more women working in footy by that point. But I have to say, when I was there, probably not in senior roles. And then, fast forward to my time at the Swans, and when I started here, 50% of our executive team were women. We had a couple of women on the board. More than 50% of our commercial team are women. And then, of course, the advent of AFLW has changed the industry again. So in terms of females working in the industry, I've seen a lot of change. But then to make that possible, and I think it's not just sport, but probably any industry, there's always that question mark for women who have careers and are really driven. When and how do I take a break if I want to have kids? And that's been a particularly hard one, I think, in this industry. Our industry is quite demanding. The season's long, and you're working weekends. It's not necessarily the most family friendly of roles. So what we've done at the Swans and some of the work I'm really proud to have been part of. One, we were the first club to launch a diversity action plan back in 2017, and the empowerment of women was one of the key pillars of that plan. As part of that plan, we launched a youth girls program to provide a pathway through our academy system to create, I guess, a way that young female athletes could then eventually join a Sydney Swans women's team, which we knew we were building for, but that didn't have in 2017. So created that pathway. But then for women who are already working at the club, adopted a paid parental leave policy and a flexible workplace policy. And what that has meant is that right across our business, we've seen, I wouldn't know how many it is now, but a lot of women take a break to have kids, be able to come back to the workplace and, have flexible hours and be able to work from home. And really, we've created an environment that makes it much easier to take that break from your career and come back. And I think what that's done is really foster, one, a really loyal workforce, but also ensure that our workforce remains diverse. So, benefits for the club, benefits for the staff that are here. And then we've just moved into a brand new facility at the Royal Hall of Industries, which I have to say is incredible. I mean, we have a studio space. I'm in the studio space at the moment. We've never had a dedicated studio in my time at the club. One of the other things we've got at the club now, though, is a creche, which is a a workspace that's designed for kids, that if I need to bring my kids into work for whatever reason, and it's happened a bunch of times, I can do that. And there's a space where I can work and they can be, and there are toys and there's a TV and there's kid-friendly places where they can go and get themselves some water. So that is a game changer again. So I would love to see more workplaces, particularly in sport, going down that path and really embracing having women on staff, but then recognising that women don't just have careers, they're mums as well, and making that transition much easier.
Definitely. And I guess, there's no guessing about it. Like the point you make around, talented staff having to make a decision around whether they continue their careers because they're looking at having a family or they've had a family. Like sport is a loss, losers when those women walk away from the game or the sport or the industry because they're not supported in that space. And there's enough brain drain and talent loss and staffing issues across the industry that we really can't afford it. So, all for the better. How much do you think setting up that diversity action plan helped the Swans get ready for their entry into AFLW and sort of set the foundation for what you want to do, entering AFLW and, hitting it, with the right infrastructure in place?
Yeah, absolutely it did. So we that diversity action plan was guided by a committee, and some of those same committee members were part of our steering committee for AFLW. Back in 2017, when the AFLW launched, our club made a conscious decision not to apply for a licence. Then we actually did a lot of work in putting together a proposal of how we might make it work. But we were really hamstrung by facilities at that point in time. And, our old facilities at the SCG, we'd well and truly outgrown them. And the Royal Hall of Industries was already on the horizon, but we knew it was a couple of years off. So we made a decision that if we were going to have a team, we wanted to make sure that there was equity in that and that the women would be given the same opportunity to be at their best as our men's team. So certainly the diversity action plan guided, I guess, the establishment of a pathway and what we would do for women in general. And then we had a separate steering committee for AFLW that really guided, well, what is it that we're going to put in place to ensure that these women that we bring to our club are absolutely set up for success. And so in our new facility, we have equal men's and women's facilities in terms of locker rooms. They both teams use the same gym, our indoor training field. So we're in a situation where both teams have equity, and now it's up to the athletes to work hard and to show us what they can do. But we wanted to do it right from the outset, and I'm really proud of the program that we've been able to put forward for AFLW, and really excited for the club to be going into its second season this year.
Terrific. Before we wrap up, what are some of the goals for the Swans, from a marketing and media and comms point of view, both for this year, 2024, and if you sort of put a longer lens through it? Because as a marketer, you've got to look at, it's a bit like the coach. You've got to look at it from a week to week and a year point of view, but you've also got to have that longer lens of what does this, what are you planning for and what do you want in, 3 to 5 years' time? So what are those short and long-term goals for you at the Swans?
Well, I guess collectively as a club, we have a game plan. It's our business plan that we are all really focused on. And the central part of our flywheel, if you like, is reaching 75,000 members, which we're aiming to do by the end of 2024, and our next premierships, across both men's and women's. And so, premierships aren't just at the feet of the players and the coaching staff. Everyone across the club can contribute to making the club strong and healthy in a financial sense, which will contribute to success on the field. So we're really focused on that, and my team certainly on that audience growth, 75,000 members, and making sure that we're getting maximum people at our home games each week. So central focus is that, but then off of that, we want to create great content. We want to entertain. And so every week our key focus in the short term is what can we do across the year to engage and entertain our fans, to have people who maybe not be, Swans fans coming to our channels and consuming our content because it's just good content. So that's what we focus on in the short term, but the long term is really the membership and reaching 75,000.
Terrific. I do love talking about it. It is something that is very AFL, of getting that fan on that escalator and using stories and content. And I think digital helps accelerate that escalator till they get to that top of that escalator. They go, here you go, Loretta, here's my credit card. You can keep it until I die. I'm good for life. Like that's sort of the holy grail for most people in their membership and the marketing space. But I do think that digital helps accelerate that, and especially when you're in a growth space, which there's lots of fans in Sydney, and I did like Javier's. He used the phrase "fans in waiting." They don't know they're fans yet, but we're going to bring them into our ecosystem. I wanted to finish off, Loretta, with the Sports Geek closing 5. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Well, remember, no, because I would have been a baby. I was born into the Norwood Football Club. So I was born into a red and blue jumper. Norwood Football Club, for your listeners who don't know, is an SANFL team, long history, a lot of premierships, but my whole family were mad Norwood supporters. So my earliest memory of being at a Norwood game, I would have been maybe 2 years old, and it was Norwood Port, they were arch rivals in the SANFL, still are. So Norwood Footy Club, and I'm still a member, still love the club.
Terrific. You would have been to a few sports events in your time. Do you have a favourite food memory or a go-to food when you're at a sports event?
Yeah, look, I'm fairly simple when it comes to sports events. I tend to go for the hot chips and jam donuts. I think jam donuts might be a footy thing more than anything. But yeah, they're definitely my go-tos.
Yeah, the three-quarter time jam donuts are a good little thing just to get you through to the last quarter, I find. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Right now, it's realestate.com.au's app, because we're looking for a house. So I'm a little bit addicted to looking at that app. But usually I have to say it's my calendar, followed by the Bureau of Meteorology to check the weather for the day.
Okay. Well, best of luck. The housing market's bad enough, but in Sydney, I can imagine that it's a tough one. Is there someone that
Tell me about it?
Yeah. Is there someone that you follow, whether it be an author or someone you follow on social, or a colleague that the podcast listeners should give a follow, and why?
Well, I should give a follow to the Sydney Swans. I've got to plug the Swans first up. We have great content, so please follow the Swans. But no, aside from that, look, Hugh Van Carlenberg, either follow him because he's amazing, but he also does a podcast, so I'll plug another podcast here, The Imperfects. Terrific listen, highly recommend.
Podcast recommendation is a problem, and finding podcasts. I'm always happy for people to recommend podcasts. I'm always asking people what podcasts to listen to. So lastly, what social media platform is your MVP? And so you can answer that personally. So what's your go-to platform? But then also, what's the platform that's kicking goals for the Swans?
Look, personally, I try to spend as little time as possible on social media. I'm mostly looking at Swans' own content. But I personally use Instagram more than anything. I love the platform, and that's probably, if I'm going to open one, it will be Instagram. But from a club perspective, really interested in TikTok and what we can do with that. It's our fastest growing social media channel. We've been working directly with a number of content creators, and I'm really interested to see where that will go, because I think it has huge potential to engage a new audience and a different demographic than perhaps are following our other social platforms. So TikTok's my MVP from a club perspective at the moment.
Terrific. And Loretta, if someone is listening to this podcast and they want to reach out and they want to say, terrific, really enjoyed it, what's the best place on the internet they could find you and reach out?
Oh, hit me up on LinkedIn. So whilst Instagram's my personal go-to, I do use LinkedIn. So hit me up on there. Search Loretta Johns, you'll find me.
Terrific. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Apologies for the Australian internet in causing some issues, but I'm hopeful that James, my trusty podcast editor, and Riverside will not let me down, and this will come out sounding terrific. So look forward to hopefully seeing you at a game, and maybe my Pies and the Swans will meet in the grand final this year. That'd be a fitting result after last year, I think.
Well, it's been my absolute pleasure, Sean, and I would love to meet your Pies in the grand final again, so long as we go one better than last year.
Why not book a Pick My Brain session with Sean Callanan? go to sportsgeekhq.com/pickmybrain.
Thanks again to Loretta Johns. You can send her a tweet, Loretta J. Johns on Twitter, or reach out to her on LinkedIn. And please say that you listened to the episode, that you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget, you can go to sportsgeekhq.com/326. We'll actually have a link in there with some of the things that we did discuss, and we'll also put a video for that Buddy 1000 goal. If you haven't seen it, I really do highly recommend that my international friends click on the link, go and check that out, to have that swarm of people on the ground celebrating what was a momentous occasion in AFL football history. Check it out. And also, if you've got someone like Loretta that I should talk to, because they're doing interesting stuff, they're doing things across digital and marketing and technology, they could be working in those roles, or they could be your CEO. I'm looking for more guests. So please nominate a guest. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/nominate to fill out the form and let us know, or you can reach out to me, Sean at SportsGeekHQ. Always looking for new and diverse voices and a range of voices across the sports industry. Before I wrap up, I wanted to talk about one of the things that's been a long time slide in my regular keynotes, and it's really great that I'm starting to do them again. And it's a slide that really tries to explain what the digital fans are, and that not all digital fans are different. And I've been using this infograph, and it was from HubSpot, I think it was originally. And it shows the different personas across the axis of consumption and contribution. So at the top right, and again, they'll be in the show notes, the top right, someone who consumes a lot and consumes a lot and contributes a lot is the megaphone fan. And normally that's the fan that people, when you're talking to higher execs or board members, that's what they think of when they think of a social media user, someone that's posting on Instagram all the time, tweeting all the time, consuming and being on all the platforms all the time. But as a digital professional, and hopefully a lot of you are nodding, not every fan acts that way, right? But they're the ones that people know about. They're the noisiest. They're the ones that are commenting on your Facebook page for the good and the bad. So that's one. But what we do find is more and more fans are not contributing as much. They're not posting as much. So they're just more lurking. They're in the background. So, some of the key ones for sport are in a circle. They want to feel like they're part of the locker room. So those live look-ins, the pictures from the rooms, pictures from training, they're the fans that want that. And so they're consuming it. They're not really, they're not posting about it a lot. And then there's a few others that I like to point out. There's obviously people that are sitting there and following your socials because they're seeking deals. They're looking for a ticketing offer. They're looking for a merch offer. That's the persona they are. And then the other one that I like, and I'm constantly updating my references, is the news junkie. And the news junkie is everyone's got that friend that always wants to be the one that breaks the news. So early, 10 years ago, I was using Craig Hutchison, Hutchie, as he's known here, as a newsbreaker. He's a newsbreaker, and we want to be, everyone has a mate that wants to be the one that breaks the news to their friends. If I was to update that reference, because Hutchie now runs SEN and isn't breaking news as much, it's, Woj bomb. Everyone wants to be able to the first one to pass on a Woj bomb and say, here's the trade. And so one of the things you want to do from your content point of view when you're designing content, it's like, well, who are our newsbreakers? Because it's a really good way for you to get that content out, help kickstart that viral nature your content could happen. So, it's understanding these different personas. And so when you're designing content, you might have those personas in mind. Then the other piece is these personas are fluid, in that depending on the content that you develop, someone might swap from one persona to another one. And I, use myself as an example here. I'm a long-standing Detroit Pistons fan from the Bad Boys days. Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, they were the Pistons I fell in love with, and that's why I started following the Pistons. So I still I still follow the Pistons. I'm sort of an info seeker and inner circle, but I'm not posting about them. They're not very good at the moment. They're hoping to get the number one pick again. But when they do go and share that content from that Bad Boys era, or even the Ben Wallace, Chauncey Billups Pistons, I go from inner circle and lurker and not sharing a lot to a mega fan and a megaphone again, and I share that content. So it's really how can you tweak your content and shape your content and effectively give your fans that digital face paint that it really resonates with them, that they will share it. And so it's a really good exercise to when you are looking at your content and reviewing what you're doing with your content, is what kind of actions do you want to get and who are you trying to talk to? It's very hard to create the content that is for everybody. And so really diving in on those personas and what you expect them to do can really produce over-index results. So I'll share that graph in the show notes. If you want to discuss something like that more and how you could adopt it with your content strategy and what you're trying to do across your content and your social platforms, please give me a call. It's an ideal sort of topic that could work for Pick My Brain, where you can book in for a 2-hour video session and we can dive in. What do those personas look like for your team, and how can your content be slightly tweaked to get that move? Because consumption is great, and it's one of the key things. But what can you get something a bit more viral, a bit more sharing? How do you make those tweaks? That's it for this episode. Thanks again to Loretta Johns from the Sydney Swans. Until next week, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Don't miss out on the latest news and updates from the sports industry. Sign up for the Sports Geek News email newsletter today and stay informed on the latest trends, insights, and analysis from the world of sports. Sign up at sportsgeekhq.com. Want to help drive more revenue from your digital efforts? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. For more resources, go to sportsgeekhq.com.